What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today with another Tale of the Tape episode. We have Drake London on tap. A lot of you guys have been requesting this one in the comments. Kenneth Walker will be the next one that I do for those of you guys that were talking about him. Basically, what we're going to be doing, if this is your first time stopping around here, we are going to be telling the story of Drake London. We already have Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks, and Breece Hall up on the channel. If you guys want to check those out as well, check out the Patreon for tons of rookie content. The link is in the description, patreon.com/fantasy stock exchange. The Dynasty Rankings Manifesto officially live. Won't have rookies quite yet integrated into the Dynasty Rankings overall, but coming up, Patreon will also get you priority for Dynasty Decisions episodes. If you want to submit your teams, your questions, your trades for those, we always prioritize our Patreons. Drawings for our second listener startup draft, which we will be doing probably sometime after the NFL draft as well. Also a benefit of becoming a Patreon. And also in the link in the description, consultations available if you want our personalized advice. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy this video. Now let's hit the intro. Okay, so Drake London, wide receiver from the USC Trojans. This is the tale of the tape of Drake London. You guys can see the graphic on the screen right now. Drake London, age 20.5. So he is younger than both Garrett Wilson and Treylon Burks by about a year or so on both guys. 6'5", 210 pounds. So we got a true alpha size wide receiver in Drake London. Basic information, background information, 4-star recruit coming out of Moore Park, California, the number 35 wide receiver in the recruiting class in 2019. He broke out at a very young age at USC in his, age 18 freshman season, 567 yards and 5 touchdowns in only 8 games played as an 18-year-old true freshman, while sharing the field with future second-round pick Michael Pittman Jr., who went over 1,200 yards in 2019. Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was a 4th-round pick of the Detroit Lions last year, who obviously had a big, league-winning stretch down the stretch for fantasy football. He also went over 1,000 yards in that season. So the fact that Michael Pittman Jr. in only 8 games, 567 yards and 5 touchdowns as a true freshman, 18-year-old with 2 NFL caliber wide receivers on the roster, very, very impressive. 2020 and 2021, he became the guy. Earlier in his, college career, he was a pure slot wide receiver. The previous 2 seasons before this year, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously on the team in 2020, and both of them on the team in 2019, he wasn't the X in the offense. He was playing the slot. And once he got the X role this year, boy, did he produce. Because as you guys can see on the screen, he played 8 games again this year, saw 119 targets in 8 games, which is 14.88 targets per game. So we're talking about a guy that was averaging nearly 15 targets per game in 2021. The USC passing offense as well threw 333 times overall in those 8 games that Drake London played for 2,522 yards and 17 touchdowns, right? That was the total passing production of the USC offense in the 8 games that Drake London played. And he actually did leave one game early in the Arizona game where he suffered his ankle injury. 35.74% target share in those 8 games, 42.98% of the receiving yards or his college dominator rating for this season, and then 41.17% of the touchdowns for the team. Again, he suffered a season-ending ankle injury in, the 9th week of the college football season against the Arizona Wildcats in his 8th game. Let's hope his medical check out at the combine, because overall, when you look at Drake London's college career as a whole, I seriously think this guy would be, among the top 5 to 10 players on most NFL draft scouts boards had he finished the season and, finished strong with a 1,500 yard, 12 touchdown season, Biletnikoff Award type of year. He definitely was on pace to do that in the games that he played, because that volume is just absurd. If he had played, 12 games that the USC offense ended up playing, he would have had 150, 160 targets on the season. So as we talk about every single, wide receiver that we talk about, if you guys are new around here, I talk about 6 fundamental traits for wide receivers. The reason I talk about these 6 is because they're quantifiable. We can match them with metrics. We can see them very easily. It doesn't require a huge, plethora of football knowledge to be able to scout these traits. And also they're not subjective, right? We can say definitively this player is good at this or not. And then we talk about those subjective traits as well, like toughness, nuance, things like that, but they weigh less than the quantifiable ones. So for Garrett Wilson, I talked about how the tape guys are going to love Garrett Wilson. Well, the opposite is true for Drake London. The analytics guys love this dude. He is the analytics darling. He is the, N'Keal Harry, Jalen Reagor this year. And I know that doesn't sound like a good thing based on the performance of those two guys in the NFL, but Ja'Marr Chase was the analytics darling last year. So it is, generally speaking, a good bet to make. Number one, the first fundamental trait that a wide receiver must have, the ability to get open, the ability to separate using route running, whatever the case is. Now, the tape guys don't like this about Drake London, right? People that watch film, people that are NFL draft scouts are going to question his ability to run routes with nuance and, whatever the case is. But in my opinion, the tape guys that don't know what they're talking about aren't going to like Drake London's route running because they don't recognize that wide receivers can win in multiple ways. They need to win in 3 phases of a rep, meaning they have to win at the release point, at the, early stage of the rep, throughout the route, if they're getting knocked off their spot or whatever, creating some initial separation. And then finally creating separation at the stem of their route where they need to, create a throwing window for their quarterback to throw them the ball. And Drake London does this in a different way than a guy like Garrett Wilson or Devontae Smith or these, shiftier, twitchier route runners. And that's okay because he has the size to be able to do that. He has the contested catch ability to be able to, come down with balls if they have a cornerback draped all over him. Go back and watch Ja'Marr Chase this year. Ja'Marr Chase did not get a tremendous amount of separation. He wins at the catch point because he's that good and because that's how he wins. He doesn't, do the Jerry Jeudy thing or the Deontay Johnson thing, the Stephon Diggs thing, Devontae Adams, where he's got 3 yards of separation on a route. That's not how Ja'Marr Chase wins. It's not how Drake London wins. They look at a receiver like London and say, well, he's a contested catch guy, can't separate. He's just the next N'Keal Harry. He's just the next, Hakeem Butler, Josh Doxson, whatever wide receiver that, couldn't separate in years past. They're going to put that label on Drake London, but I promise you, he does separate in a high way. And the reason it's flat out bullshit, because people said it about Ja'Marr Chase last year, and Drake London wins reps. He wins reps when you look at him, and it's evident throughout his metrics. His first phase where he wins at the release point with a good release package needs some developing in this area for sure, but his size definitely helps with that. He's 6'5", 210 pounds. It's very hard for smaller corners to beat him at the line of scrimmage. Second phase of the route is where he doesn't separate at a massive clip, right? He doesn't separate like Garrett Wilson separates. He doesn't separate like Devontae Smith, Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, all these guys that are very, very good route runners. But the third phase, winning at the catch point, which is where he's best and where Ja'Marr Chase is best as well, using his frame to shield defenders, create throwing windows. It's not an easy thing to do. And Ja'Marr Chase did it better than anybody in last year's class. And I think Drake London comfortably does it better than anybody in this year's class. If he couldn't separate, he wouldn't have performed in these separation-based metrics, which is why I believe this 100%, because Drake London would not have the number 1 PFF receiving grade in this entire draft class if he couldn't separate. He would not be 4th in yards per route run if he couldn't separate, 3rd against man and 2nd against zone. Those, metrics measure your route running ability because they're basically based on you winning the rep. So if you can't win a rep, meaning you can't separate and your only, attribute is that you can, take catches off the top of a defender's helmet, that is the only way that you're winning the rep, meaning that on most routes, you're not getting the ball because your quarterback isn't willing to throw you the ball up every single play. If you weren't getting open, if you weren't winning reps, then you wouldn't get targets. And clearly Drake London is good at getting targets with a 35.73% target share. So that was the biggest one that a lot of people are going to have question marks about Drake London, which is why I spent the most time on it. Obviously, these next couple are a little bit more straightforward. And number 2 is hands. Once you get open, you have to catch the ball. I feel like a broken record already at this point in the draft process, but Drake London does have some concentration drops, which I've said mostly about every receiver so far. On his resume, he had 8 drops this season on 119 targets, but we know from NFL fantasy production that drops necessarily aren't a sign that you can't be successful in the NFL or in fantasy, because when you look at the league leaders in drops, and I'm not making this up, look at this list. These were the players and the wide receivers that led the league in drops this year. Deebo Samuel, top 3 fantasy wide receiver. Ja'Marr Chase, top 5 fantasy wide receiver. Tyreek Hill, top 8 fantasy wide receiver. A.J. Brown, very good when he was on the field. Jalen Waddle, very good. Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Justin Jefferson, all these guys were very, very good for fantasy. So dinging concentration drops is something that a lot of people tend to do. People did it for Julio Jones when he was coming out of school. People did it for Ja'Marr Chase last year. It's not really that important because having a lot of drops means that you're commanding a lot of targets. And when we talk about hands, this category that I'm talking about, I'm not referring to drops necessarily. I'm referring to contested catches, holding on through contact, and technique, meaning that you're catching the ball with your hands, not your body. And Drake London's very good in this area. He excels in this area. You'll see a number of contested catches that he makes look very, very easy. Is he a pure contested catch wide receiver? No, but he is very, very good in contested situations, which is a good thing given the fact that he isn't going to create 3 yards of separation. So he does need to be able to hold on in contested situations through heavy contact, so on and so forth. So moving off of hands and, route running and separation, we get into yards after catch. So once you get open, once you catch the ball, are you doing something with it? And this was an area that I was pretty surprised by with Drake London. I knew coming in that Drake London had drawn comparisons to the guy over my right shoulder in Mike Evans. I knew a lot of people compared him to Mike Evans, and Mike Evans is not dynamic after the catch. I know this about Mike Evans. I watch his entire career very closely as a Buccaneers fan. Mike Evans is not dynamic after the catch. And London, on the other hand, I think is a little bit more dynamic after the catch than Mike Evans is. He has a bit more juice in this area. He can make people miss, and he can go through them. Not to the degree that Treylon Burks can. Obviously, Treylon Burks is a perfect 110 out of 110 after the catch. He is one of the freakiest after the catch receivers I've seen in the last couple of years. But he can do it at an adequate rate, Drake London. He ranks 4th in this class with a 25% tackles avoided rate after the catch, which is, again, very impressive for a 6'5", 210-pound wide receiver to be doing that after the catch, along with Treylon Burks. Most of the receivers that are good after the catch in this class are your Jameson Williams types, Garrett Wilson types that are shiftier, smaller wide receivers. But the fact that Drake London and Treylon Burks, for that matter, can do it at such a high rate is very impressive. 460 of his 1,058 yards came after the catch this season, which is, again, is also encouraging because he had an average depth of target of 9.2 yards. This is a possession receiver. Out routes, dig routes, things that he's running don't necessarily equate to big after the catch type of plays. And he also wasn't used a tremendous amount downfield either. So the fact that he is putting up pretty decent after the catch numbers in a role that doesn't really equate to big after the catch opportunities is very, very encouraging for a guy like Drake London. Now, kind of just alluded to it. Number 4 is usage. So how do you win? Where do you win on the field? Do you win in the slot? Do you win on design touches, downfield, whatever? Because we want our wide receivers in fantasy to be a 3-level threat. Deebo Samuels don't come along very often where they're given design touches all the time. Typically, we want receivers to win the way that Jamar Chase wins on the short game, intermediate game, and in the deep game. That's how we get the best wide receivers in fantasy. And similar to what I said for Garrett Wilson, the path to fantasy production for Drake London is elite volume, right? It was the reason he was so good in college. He can do it at the next level as well. The reason Mike Evans is not my comp for Drake London, kind of spoiler alert there, is because they do not win in the same way. The only things that are similar about Drake London and Mike Evans are their size, their underrated kind of route running ability, and their contested catch ability, which is, enough things to say that you could compare him to Mike Evans. But London wins a lot of short routes, and it's the reason he had 119 targets. So the reason he averaged nearly 15 targets per game. 23 of his 119 targets were 20-plus yard targets. So he's not really used a whole lot downfield, but on a percentage basis, 19.3% of his total targets came 20-plus yards downfield, which ranks 17th in the class. So he doesn't provide a huge amount of deep target potential at the NFL level. He can do it, but it's not his calling card like it was for Mike Evans coming out of Texas A&M, or how it's been basically for Mike Evans in the NFL. His first 2 seasons, as well, as I kind of alluded to earlier in the video, he was exclusively a slot receiver. And in his junior year, he transitioned to 86.2% of his routes being run from the outside, from the X receiver alignment, which is a must for him. The fact that he did that in his junior season, there would be a big time question mark if he had been a slot receiver his entire career. The fact that he went to the outside and he was the most productive he had been in his entire career, now that, Michael Pittman Jr. and Amon-Ra St. Brown went off to the NFL, that is very encouraging to see, knowing that he can play in the slot, he can play on the outside, he can play pretty much in any alignment that you ask of him. Number 5, athleticism. He's a good athlete for sure. I don't think he's a bad athlete whatsoever, especially when you take into account that he is very big, 6'5", 210 pounds, but he is not a freak athlete. He's not, Treylon Burks as an athlete. And he should run about mid 4.5s as his 40-yard dash. Once you weight adjust that, it'll be a pretty decent speed score. Agilities and vertical jump are the things that are going to matter more for Drake London, in my opinion, than his deep speed, because like I said, he wins short. He wins on contested catches. So if he has a 32-inch vertical jump, that's going to be a problem. If he has a 41-inch vertical jump, that's a lot better. And his agilities being, 20th percentile will be a problem as well, as opposed to 60th, 70th, 80th percentile, which would be very good considering his size. So athleticism, I'm expecting a pretty decent combine out of Drake London, but nothing that's going to, blow up the box score like Treylon Burks potentially could do. All right, the final of the fundamental traits is his analytics profile. And like I said, this is the analytics darling this year. Everybody who follows the numbers and, scouts these prospects on paper are going to love Drake London. I know DFB Encounter on Twitter loves Drake London. It's his wide receiver 1. He's a numbers guy, and it makes sense because I gave him a perfect analytics grade because this is his analytics profile. It's actually insane how good it is. 18.1 breakout age, right? 99th percentile. It's the best in the class. Not even close, actually. 35.7% college target share. Like I said, in the 8 games that he played this year, second best in the class, only behind Wan'Dale Robinson, who's more of the gadgety Rondale Moore type. So it's kind of understandable why he gets more targets. College dominator at 43%. Like I said earlier, 43% of the team's receiving yards this year when Drake London was on the field. That is 88th percentile in the class overall as well. The only concern that somebody might have from an analytics perspective on Drake London is health, because he has missed a couple games here and there in his career. And after the ankle injury in week 9 of the college football season, some people might ding him for that. Again, I'm not a doctor. I don't have access to his medicals, so I cannot grade his medical situation. If we hear at the combine that he has been red flagged by doctors, team doctors and shit, I'm going to move him down, because that's obviously something that I don't have access to that information. And if that happens, it's going to affect his draft capital. It's going to affect where teams are valuing him, and that affects his overall grade for me as a result. So if he played 12 games this year, the 12 games that USC played, I have no doubt in my mind this would have been a top 10 NFL draft pick easily. And I still think that some teams may value him there as well, because like I said, if he had played 12 games this year, this is your Biletnikoff winner. This is a 1,500-yard, 12 touchdown type of wide receiver on 160 targets. And we're looking at a true X receiver for a lot of teams in this draft, especially picking in that, 5 to 12 range that need a number 1 wide receiver and are looking for somebody like that. So moving off of the fundamental traits for a wide receiver, I'm just going to briefly talk about the subjective traits for a wide receiver, some things that people might ding Drake London for, but I don't think are, as important, because we can't really quantify them. They're just, beauties in the eye of the beholder when you talk about these traits. But, smarts, awareness, toughness, nuance, and route running and stuff, I think he checks these boxes, especially given his size. I think he has underrated nuance in his route running for a big receiver, similar to what Mike Evans presents in the NFL. Smart against zone coverage as well. I think his awareness and his smarts as a wide receiver is very instinctual for him. He's very good at finding soft spots in zone coverage, which is why he ranks second in the draft class in yards per run against zone coverage. He plays physical in all phases of his game, whether he's run blocking, at the release point, after the catch, whatever the case is, he's very, very physical as well. So again, subjective traits, he pretty much checks all the boxes for me as well. Now, final grades. Where does he stack up with the rest of the class? Where does he stack up in previous years? Based on a scale of 1,100, which is the scale I grade on, the king is dead, right? My previous wide receiver 1 was Treylon Burks. He was the first wide receiver I talked about in a tail of the tape. I expected him to be my wide receiver 1, just given, what I knew about him coming in. But the king is dead. Treylon Burks has been outdone by Drake London in my grading system, 978.5 out of 1,100, a mid-first round grade on Drake London. It's the same grade I have on Treylon Burks. It's only like 978.5 versus 975. Like, it's very, very close. They're in the same tier. But draft capital, testing, landing spot, that'll determine who ends up being my 101, or at least my number 1 wide receiver come rookie drafts in, April and May. So I would take London first. If you guys have a rookie draft right now or in the coming weeks before the combine or something, I personally would take Drake London first. Or, maybe you're a little wary of the health situation. You want to take Treylon Burks. Either way, these are tier 1 wide receivers. They're both very, very good. Pro comparison for the player, again, the low hanging fruit is Mike Evans. He definitely has some similarities to Mike Evans with his size, route running, and contested catch ability. But my comp for him is actually another NFC South wide receiver, and Marquise Colston. Marquise Colston, I watched pretty closely as well, because he played for the Saints, and because I was a Bucs fan, he terrorized my team quite a bit. And I also think he has a little bit of Michael Thomas in his game as well. So kind of like a mix of the 2 best Saints receivers of the last 20 years. These guys separate well with physicality. They're underrated after the catch. And the big key, and the reason why they're actually my comparison, is because they're possession receivers. That's the type of role that they play for the New Orleans Saints. And whereas Mike Evans plays the deep threat role for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. So I don't think Drake London is going to be a deep threat at the next level. I think whatever team, picks him is going to want him to be their X receiver, their number 1 wide receiver, their possession wide receiver, similar to what we've seen in his former teammate, Michael Pittman Jr. I do think a team is going to use him in that regard, and kind of transitioning into best fits for him, best team fits, best scheme fits. The ideal landing spot for Drake London is a spot where he can get the most targets, because that is what he excelled at doing in college. That's what he's going to excel at doing at the next level as well. Obviously, the Michael Thomas similarities make sense and make him a great fit for Detroit if Dan Campbell wants a number 1 wide receiver they have the 31st or 32nd pick in the first round, depending on who wins the Super Bowl. And Drake London may fall to that point. Maybe they have to trade up for him. I actually don't really know at what point Drake London goes in the first round, but I do think he's going to be a first round wide receiver. If he goes a lot higher, let's say he tests well, medicals check out, he could go to a team like Cleveland, a team like Atlanta. Those teams also make sense. Give Baker Mayfield a big target to help make up for some of his inaccuracies. And I also do like him in Atlanta if the Falcons decide to move on from a guy like Calvin Ridley. I think he makes a lot of sense in all of those places. And like I said, this is my number one wide receiver as of right now, waiting, testing, combine results, and, medicals and projected draft capital in the coming months. But him, Treylon Burks, and Garrett Wilson are probably going to make up my tier one of wide receivers. I haven't watched anybody else yet, so I don't know if anybody is in that caliber, in that stratosphere of wide receivers. Maybe a Chris Olave, Jameson Williams is, but we'll have to get cross that bridge when we get there. Again, if you guys did enjoy this video, put a lot of effort into it, so please leave a like. It's totally free to do so. Comment any of your thoughts down below. Where's Drake London stack up for you? Who do you like more, Treylon Burks or Drake London? Subscribe to the channel if you are new as well. And if you guys are curious, if you want to check out the Patreon, you can see the list of benefits, patreon.com/fantasy stock exchange. Link is in the description for that. Peace out, guys. I'll talk to you soon.